have not heard, our regularly scheduled speaker, Bob Doppold, is unable to join us. Unfortunately, he had an extreme weather event in his home, so he couldn't join us because he's without power. So we're being flexible, and Madeline has agreed to kind of do her own spin on the content, and we're really excited to hear about that. So this, you can go to the next slide, Madeline. So this webinar is being hosted by the ALA Sustainability Roundtable's Online Education Committee. So I am the chair of that committee, and the other committee members are Rachel Silverstein, Steve Butzell, and Danny Scott, our SustainRT intern. And we have another SustainRT Online Ed webinar coming up just next week. It's actually a follow-up webinar to today's session. And it's going to be a practicing presence mindfulness experience webinar. So we'll be doing some breathing exercises, maybe some visualizations, and it will be led by Danny. And she is, has some experience with mindfulness and is a yoga instructor. And I'm really excited to do something that's a little bit out of the box as far as webinars go, but I think that should be a really exciting experience. So hopefully, if you have the time, I would love it for everyone who is here today to join us for that. Next slide, please. So today's agenda, we just have a couple of updates about the work that SustainRT is doing and upcoming events. We will be doing, or Madeline will be providing a condensed presentation based on Bob Doppold's work. We'll have a brief breathing and grounding exercise, and then we'll take a look at a kind of a case study, a Massachusetts library partnership with communities preparing for extreme weather. And then we'll have a brainstorming activity where we can talk about resources, services, programming regarding climate disruption. And I think the majority of that discussion will take place in chat. And also feel free, if you have any questions or comments at any time throughout the session, just get into the chat box and type it in, and Madeline or somebody else will be sure to address it. And then next slide, please. So some of the highlights of SustainRT. We've got an election coming up, so if you are a member of the roundtable, please be sure to vote. We'll be voting on a new coordinator, a new member at large. We also have a call out for committee volunteers, or we will have a call out coming in the spring for committee volunteers. So if you are looking for ways to get involved with Sustainability Roundtable, or if you're interested in sustainability and libraries, we would love for you to volunteer for one of our committees. We have the committees are online ed, outreach, governance, and membership. Are those all of the committees, Madeline? Yeah, so those are the committees. We also have an LIS conversation coming up, which is another online conversation that's going to be on Friday, March 22nd from 3 to 4 p.m. That will be unveiling our mentoring program. So I think Madeline has been working on putting together a kind of a mentoring pilot program where we pair members of SustainRT with interested LIS students. And so this will be the grand unveiling of that. We also have a really exciting annual pre-conference session at ALA Annual that will be in DC. It's going to be on Friday, June 21st from 1 to 5. This is also something that Madeline will be leading or facilitating. That's on climate change conversations in libraries, stabilizing ourselves and our patrons. So it's really another event that is really closely related to what we'll be talking about today. There are also going to be other meetings and programs related to ALA Annual, so those will probably be announced soon. And then a big announcement about general sustainability in libraries. So there's a resolution for the adoption of sustainability as a core value of libraries has passed at ALA. So that's really exciting, and it's going to be an opportunity for the accreditation standards for ALA accredited library schools or LIS programs to incorporate sustainability into the curriculum. So that could be, one example of how that might be an impact of that change. But I think that's a really exciting development as far as sustainability in libraries goes. And so that's it for the announcements, unless you have anything to add, Madeline. And otherwise,
I only wanted to clarify that our mentoring program actually is being developed by Danny Scott, who is our SustainRT intern and a librarian, a public librarian, and Jamie Conklin. They're both part of the membership committee, so I'm really excited about that. Thank you, Eric. I'm going to continue on with the Bob Doppelt's part. And welcome to everybody. So you probably all have heard or are now seeing that Bob couldn't join us. We're wishing him well again. He said, "I'm sorry, we got hit with a major surprise storm, 3 feet of snow, trees down, major damage." And in parentheses, this is the second record storm in 3 years. What does that tell us? Power's off all over town, and they think it will take 3 to 7 days for it to be restored. No cell or landlines. So when I first got this message, my heart just dropped. I was like, oh no, we're gonna have to cancel. And then like a few minutes later, I said, no, we cannot cancel. This is a perfect reason to carry on. This work is really urgent. We've all put the time aside. So thank you for those of you who continued on this course. And much gratitude to Bob, who will be highlighted in this first part. So Bob is the founder and coordinator of International Transformational Resilience Coalition. He was the director of a climate leadership initiative at University of Oregon. He's a psychologist and a professor of environmental science. He teaches mindfulness at various well-established institutions. And finally, his book, Transformational Resilience, is the one that this webinar is based on, and I have it right here with me because we'll do one of the exercises from it in a little while. And essentially he has this incredible model for presencing and purposing ourselves and our communities in the face of climate change. And his whole approach has to do with the psychosocial, spiritual aspects, as much as he is also involved in changing policy and infrastructure. This webinar really is about the sort of internal landscape and how we need to work with it. So these are all his slides. He states, the climate crisis is unlike any modern society has faced. Even if we aggressively reduce emissions, it will continue worsening for decades and mix with other disasters and stresses. And because they're happening sooner and closer and closer together, less time for recovery. There's predictions that it will aggravate racism and other types of oppression, disrupt social support networks and other critical systems that protect us, and magnify many health inequities. And if left unaddressed, the resulting psychological and psychosocial spiritual maladies might be as bad as the actual physical impacts and could derail emissions cuts. So this is pretty intense stuff. Take some breaths while we listen and read. And we will do a pause at the end of this cycle of slides so we can kind of check in with ourselves and each other. So here's his graphic on trauma and toxic stress, which are epidemic today. And you can just read around the dial of people's fears of violence and poverty and all sorts of systemic oppression, political polarization, unemployment, and high levels of ACEs. For people not familiar, that's aversive childhood experiences. And now at the bottom, there's that line that says, then add to this the acute disasters and chronic toxic stresses generated by rising global temperatures. So So there's a lot of layering of pressure here that he's identified. So this is a big old slide with information, but it's talking about the rising temperature, which two-thirds of the rise has happened since 1975. And many of us have been following just this fall the IPCC report, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, directs us to cut emissions by 45% within the next 12 years and essentially to zero by 2050 to keep temperatures making our world habitable. And even if temperatures can be constrained, there'll be more frequent and extreme disasters and toxic stresses that will carry on because those are already in motion. And here he outlines some of the consequences of the more frequent and extreme disasters. So it's the heat and the cold and the wet and the dry. And examples of psychosocial impacts of these changes, he points to hotter temperatures. Studies have shown result in increases in these various challenges to society: substance abuse, domestic violence. You can read the list down yourself. And then he cites a study that looked at 30 years of crime and weather data and saw a correlation between higher temperatures and assault, robbery, burglary, and other kinds of theft. And then also these studies were happening in Europe where they linked hotter weather to higher crime rates. And not only that, climate change is what is called a multiplier of injustices. So indigenous communities, people of color, immigrants, low-income populations, and other frontline communities get hardest hit. And that all the injustices and inequities are aggravated by climate change. Equally important is but how people are experiencing, seeing it, and worrying about it inside their heads. Things they're worrying about, according to his research, is their children's future, loss of place, community, culture, and our natural environment, disruption of family and friend networks, being involuntarily moving. I heard a statistic the other day that in a few decades, there'll be 1 in 9 people will be on the move on the planet. And there'll be shortages of water, food, other resources, economic disruption, unemployment, illness, diseases, and like we said, disaster-triggered crime. And again, these systemic injustices will be aggravated. And now he gives what happens inside the brain around toxic stress. So here's the prefrontal cortex, that brain circle with the amygdala, which is at like the base of your neck.
Well, here, Alex?
And the amygdala is also called our fear and alarm center. So it's where our fear is triggered, and it releases neurochemicals into our body that causes hyperarousal.
What are you watching?
Smoke,
A
even
webinar.
though there might not be danger, the
Oh,
chronic,
you lost me already.
What?
Lost me already. Lost me at webinar.
a deregulated nervous system.
Hey, I
I'm
want
sorry,
to know.
somebody's not on.
Is,
Quite
libraries
Eric,
building
are you able to
climate
mute people?
disruption, rebuilding libraries and climate disruption resilience.
No, it's not working for me to mute. But I
Okay,
think
let me-
Tara,
I can
Can
do
you
that.
please mute
Please.
yourself if you're talking,
Elaine, as they
please?
say.
If you're not,
Yeah, they might not be able to hear us.
Tara, if you can hear me, can you please mute yourself?
Is that you? Are you on TV?
I think it's better now. Okay, so here's the top of the slide just popped on. So the frontal cortex is your executive center that can direct but not control. So it's where you make meaning in your brain and where you have memories of past traumas. So when the amygdala is on like a red alert, your frontal cortex is functioning as well as it could, and that's where the toxic stress cycle is activated. And what he's pointing to is that we need a whole new way of thinking how to respond to this. Because yes, there's mental health programs in place, but they're already full up. They're already fragile. Most of the way they treat people is small windows of time. You get treated, you move on. And they're inadequate because they don't help people cope with persistent and intensifying toxic climate stresses. So this is all going in the direction of what he's proposing that we do as a nation and a world. Because the climate crisis also offers an opportunity for profound transformation. And as painful as it is, this adversity can be a really unprecedented impetus for us to learn, grow, and transform as human beings. So that is a really the way that he's managing all of this with us. Transformational resilience is essential for climate change. It's also sometimes referred to as post-traumatic growth. And a quote from his book, "This kind of resilience is the ability to constructively cope with climate and other adversities and use them as catalysts to learn, grow, and increase personal, social, and ecological well-being above pre-crisis levels." And this is where his work is unique. We all think and talk about resilience where you bounce back. What he's proposing is that's not where we want to get back to. We want to increase our skills and understanding and be trauma-informed now so that we're getting ahead of the curve and we're doing more, we're almost bouncing forward. So we're strengthening and managing our central nervous system now in preparation for tougher times and to enjoy the fruits of that kind of mindful living even right now. So imagine the benefits of a global preventative transformational resilience movement. And he proposes that it will help, and he's also seen proof, that adults and youth become trauma-informed, build on strengths, enhance personal and collective protective factors so that we can all think and act in healthy ways, even in unhealthy conditions. Leaders learn to promote these social narratives, shift cultural norms and practices, and help groups be safe, healthy, just, and equitable. Everyone would learn how to use adversity as a transformational catalyst to find meaning, direction, and hope in ways that dramatically increase personal, social, and ecological well-being. This is his vision, and he's been working on it for years. And here's proof that it would work. These kind of things have happened and are happening. For instance, like campaigns to prevent people from smoking. You know, we saw the dangers, we got on top of it, and it's really, really reducing. And people have a very clear understanding now that smoking is dangerous. Same with young people drinking, managing HIV, seatbelt laws. So these are examples he gives of how this is doable to create something that's so established and well accepted. So his proposal to us today is to help launch a movement to make the U.S. and other nations trauma-informed, human resilience-enhanced societies for climate traumas and toxic stresses. This is his call to action to us today and people all around the world that he's been working with. And here's just one sort of, but essential piece of how the work looks in practice. It's the growth model, and you'll notice on the left-hand side of the screen, GRO, is that called an anagram? So grounding ourselves, remembering our skills, resources, our networks, observing our reactions, living a conscious life. That's the presencing part. And the purposing part is watching for insights and meaning in even hard times, tapping into our values and harvesting hope for possibilities and making choices that enhance personal, social, and environmental well-being. So that's the end of his slides that I sort of picked out of his longer presentation. And what I wanted to do was try one of the grounding exercises. This is a basic controlled breathing exercise from his book. And this very simple exercise, which I'll lead in a moment, is really quite incredible research has shown that it stabilizes the nervous system. You can activate it in a moment's notice. It has quick effects, lowers blood pressure and heart rate, calms you down, gets that hyperarousal sort of released, and it can even alter your gene expression to boost immune function and metabolism and just give you increased physical health overall. So let's try this. If you would, I invite you to put your feet flat on the ground. That's a stabilizing posture for doing these kind of breathing exercises. And this will only take a couple of minutes. What we're going to be doing is doing a deep inhale through the mouth or nose for a count of 5 or so, and your belly should expand as you breathe in. Then you hold that breath in for just a moment and exhale through the mouth a little bit longer than it took for you to inhale. So you would do this if you were on your own for about 5 to 10 minutes. But let's just try like 1 minute on our own right now. So inhaling deeply through the mouth or nose, belly expanding, hold the breath for a moment, and exhale. I'm just going to leave you to do that for a moment. I'll do it too. Okay. So you got a little taste of one of the exercises from his book. And I wanted to take a moment also to invite people, just for a couple minutes, use the chat box if you would like to type in any responses to the content that I just shared, or just how you're doing right now, what your internal experience has been, how you're feeling in your body. I'm just looking at the chat for the first time, and I see a bunch of things in there. Yes, so Beth is sharing that this kind of breathing is really good. Yeah, Danny says she feels activated from the slides. I get it. I do too. I mean, it's really quite stimulating to see and read all those facts, you know, one after the other. That's why I wanted to take a minute to kind of settle us down again. Yeah. Oh, Abra's here. Great. Thanks. Yes. Abra says she's grateful for this work and how it's articulated. What is the call for climate mitigation in a whole systems approach? Well, you'll have to read the book. I can't do it justice. And he talks, there's a whole big chapter that's all about how to do this work individually, in organizations, in communities. So as librarians and whoever else has gratefully joined our call, the book really guides you through things like assets mapping is just one thing that comes to mind. So he really takes a very deep look at this. Will you be able to post these slides? I should have mentioned, by the way, this whole webinar is recorded. So yeah, we'll post the whole thing, and I'll make sure it's okay with Bob if we share the slides as well. Maybe all of his slides. Yeah, and Jeannie Fander says, yeah, she felt like tightening in the chest when that long list was read off, and breathing does help. Yeah, so this was a good, good exercise. exercise in the effectiveness of something as simple as that controlled breathing. Oh, someone asked about the book title. It's called Transformational Resilience: How Building Human Resilience to Climate Disruption Can Safeguard Society and Increase Well-Being. I just love that subtitle. It says so much already. So thanks everybody for adding some pieces to the chat, and we'll have to revisit those, I hope, before the end of the session. I've got to move on with the more interactive part of the session. Well, in a new way anyway. So what I wanted to show you was something I'm really excited about. I wanted to explain that in Massachusetts, where I live, we have a bunch of librarians partnering with a group in Boston called Communities Responding to Extreme Weather, otherwise known as CREW. And Aaron, I'm sorry, Aaron, I can't remember how to pronounce your name, Troncoso, I think. Aaron's,
that's perfect.
Say again?
That's perfect.
Oh, Troncoso, yeah. So Aaron's here on the call. He and Craig Altamose, and I suppose others from CREW, launched the first annual Climate Preparedness Week last year. Chris Glass, who's a librarian on the call, invited me to come and give a talk with him out at Boston Public Library as part of Climate Prep Week. And it was so successful and meaningful to the librarians in the room that some of us got together and with Aaron and Craig's help said, like, let's do Climate Prep Week 2019 and bring as many librarians as we can onto the map, as we've been calling it, and have them do some kind of climate change resilience event that last week in September. And when they add their event through Aaron's assistance, there'll actually be pins on a map. So I'm just holding this vision of the whole state of Massachusetts filled with pins and libraries educating their communities and building community and resilience that last week in September and of course beyond. And Aaron, do you want to say anything before I give some examples? Because what I was going to do next was, oh, pardon me. Aaron, Craig, me, Chris, and CJ Wong, who's also on the call. She's a librarian at Merrimack College. We're going to do a webinar for Massachusetts librarians to get ready for Climate Prep Week. It's not required to do the webinar to be part of the week events, but it will help get them sort of mobilized and give them some ideas. And so I'm just offering this up because it really seems like it's working out well so far in the planning stages. And maybe that's something that you want to think about in your state. Like what environmental or other kind of group could you partner with and, you know, weave your networks together and spread this kind of work further and deeper. Let me go one more slide. So Aaron, I was going to give a few examples but do you want to take like 1 minute to say anything else?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I'll just mention that sort of we did do this first annual Climate Preparedness Week, which was mostly in Greater Boston. Hopefully, we'll be expanding that, as Madeline said, to the rest of Massachusetts. And we definitely found that our engagement with libraries, the events we were able to have, educational events, community service events, and community and individual planning events. People got to make emergency plans, for example, were just so meaningful, and the librarians we worked with were so dynamic and so concerned with this issue that, as Madeline said, we're really committed to deepening our engagement with the library community for Climate Prep Week 2019, and really looking forward to co-hosting this webinar coming up in May, I believe it is.
Yes, May 14th.
May 14th, great.
Thank you, Aaron. So I'm just going to wrap up in a moment. I wanted to just show examples of Climate Prep Week ideas that people have done already last year, but kind of building on some of them. One thing that I imagine would be really interesting would be to hold a climate change World Cafe. And I know a lot of you know this model of World Cafe because ALA did some significant training on it over the last few years. It's basically a convivial setting where you can have a very dynamic civil discussion about something even as sticky as climate change. And so I gave a very brief description of some questions you might ask at these tables. What is yours to do? Who would you turn to in your local community in the event of a climate change disaster? What tools do you have to offer? What would you need? Questions like that. And I've done this now several times with great success. Then you move your tables, and while you're having these conversations and you've switched seats, you're also making doodles and writing and making what they call the invisible visible. And then you harvest this collective wisdom, and it's a really quite amazing process that happens in the room over about 2 hours. So World Cafe is a really great thing I'd like to encourage people to think about. And then some other examples, to have a panel, a film, everything, you know, of course, engaging with the community, a book club with an action that you do. Some of you might have heard of the Elm Dance, which Joanna Macy has brought all around the world. You can see a picture of it on the right side. Just really thinking creatively here, making art, bringing youth together, assembling go bags. So like in the emergency moment, you and your family can evacuate your house and grab a bag that has some food and cash and some emergency supplies, flashlights, etc. Maybe hold a mindfulness series that launches that last week in September if you're in Massachusetts. And even for people that feel a little overwhelmed with adding yet one more thing, you could just have a display, and that alone would really raise people's awareness. So now I want to open it up. Really, the rest of the time is basically like us asking you to think about, what do you want to do with this information? How would you bring this kind of awareness to your community about climate change and the need for more resilient practices and community building? Whether it's resources that you're purchasing, services that you offer, programs that you would start to imagine or are already doing and want to expand on. So really now it's an interactive period, and I'm inviting people back into the chat to begin this final phase of the webinar. And it's going to be quiet for a while until some of the questions get accumulated and we can start answering them. And Danny, I think you were going to maybe help with this part. It's a little hard to see all of them at one time. So if you want to call out some questions or answer some. Eric, I invite you to join in if it's questions. We need 3 people on.
Hey, Madeline. This is Danny. So I'm not seeing a ton of questions. I did want to just highlight something that Abra said. She mentioned Carbon Farming, it's a book, Carbon Farming Solution by Eric Tonesmeyer. There's powerful research in there and data for different forms of farming or climate reversal sequestration. Also, Fred was just mentioning that at SUNY Buffalo, they're looking for 3 science librarians, chemistry and physics, engineering, geography, and maps. Other than that, I'm not seeing many questions, but.
I see one here. Madeline, do you know, this is from Margaret. She was looking for guidelines on how small libraries can start conversations or implementing climate change mitigation and managing those sorts of issues in communities. Do you know of anything?
Nothing's popping into my head, but you know, other people can chime in this moment. And this is also time to share resources with each other. And I'm happy to talk with people after this. I think it'll be hard for me to like access resources myself as I'm sort of scrolling through these questions. But Margaret, you know how to reach me.
Hey, Madeline, this is Beth. Do you mind if I just talk rather than type?
Okay, yeah, sure. And if people want to unmic, feel free. It feels small enough, we can do that.
I do feel like with the small libraries, especially if they can find networks of other people, like I used to be a consultant in Colorado and work with lots of small libraries, and the key I thought was like bringing them together so they have like-minded people. So maybe for small libraries, finding other people in your community or other small libraries nearby. Now, I'm at a really big library at Oregon State, but I just got on the Faculty Senate, just created a carbon committee to try to reach carbon neutral by 2025 or close to it. Good luck, but
pretty
and
ambitious.
I feel like we're doing a lot here already, but there is so much more to go. But it's from the Faculty Senate, and there's reps from every school and college, and we met for the first time. And I'm at least excited that we're coming together, and we got in small groups, and we like started brainstorming things we can do, and even the little things might help make a difference. So that's just one little thing I thought I would share.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Beth. Great. And Margaret is saying, yes, that's a great idea. They have a network in town, but they're feeling a little overwhelmed and ineffectual. Aber Dresdale is on the call. This is, I don't want to put you on the spot, Aber, but if there's anything you wanted to add, Aber is, well, if you want to come on and say what you do, I feel like this is the kind of work that you could help librarians think about how to grow beyond, the first conversation.
Sure. Thanks, Madeline. Hey, everybody. It's such an honor to be part of this call. In addition to teaching at University of Massachusetts Amherst in the Sustainable Food and Farming program, I'm also an author of the Regenerative Design for Changemakers Guidebook and Direct Regenerate Change, which I can post links to both of those. But basically, I've been in the permaculture design field. If those of you don't know what it is, it's taking ecological design principles and pairing it with an intentional design process. A lot of people apply it to landscapes or farm design, but we can use a lot of those tools and frameworks and draw from also social justice and systems thinking to think about social landscapes and how to apply a design process to social change making, including thinking about climate resilience responses from the community scale to the federal scale. And so Madeline and I are actually putting together a grant proposal right now to lead these trainings that I lead, Regenerative Design from Change Makers, for librarians interested in climate change leadership. So it's a great resource, either the book or the trainings. There's also another colleague, author of Change Here Now, which is a great social permaculture design book that I can include, but thinking about like how can we use proactive design principles in developing this transformational resilient shift away from a scared, paralyzed position in response to really, facing the feelings that we have, a la Joanna Macy work or, other forms of counseling work, and then really like taking a proactive, responsive agency in design thinking and other forms to create this transition. So hope that was helpful.
Thank you, Abra. That's great. And Margaret asked Abra if you would please type in the names of the books in the chat. And Amy Brunvan, I'm glad you're here. She is pointing to a pretty well-known book now called Drawdown by Paul Hawken. That's a really useful tool. And as far as like what to do or what to do next, I would say, be experimental a little bit and ask your community what they would want if you want to poll them. I mean, something is better than nothing. I feel like the more you kind of like explore possibilities, the more that answers will start emerging. So I just really encourage you, even if it's something simple, to just keep putting it on people's radar. And one idea that happened in a workshop I was a part of was just to make like a big whiteboard and have people write down what they're curious to learn about, this, and if they want to be part of like something that's talking in the community, they could slip their name and email into like a box, and then you could gather a group together. So I also have a list of resources that I can share, but I don't know how to get it from this chat box. I don't want to mess up my webinar setting. But a lot of you know how to get in touch with me. If you want that resource with lots of ideas of activities, here's my email, and feel free to be in touch. Beth is saying she really likes the idea of design thinking conversation, definitely.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. This is Jenny Rockwell in Santa Rosa. I just started reading Drawdown because we're having an ecosystem restoration discussion circle as part of a, sustainability series. And so I haven't gotten very far, but for example, you look at the wind farms example as the number one, or refrigeration or number one. And one issue I have with the book is it doesn't, the refrigeration thing, maybe you can make sure you're personally disposing of your refrigerator properly or your air conditioning. But, and you see that there was this big forum where a lot was changed with the HFCs, but I'm still looking for that everyday person, what you can do. And it's like, we're not these big politicians or engineers who have the ability to orchestrate these projects. We can influence policy through voting or things like that. But has anyone, what I'm trying to do when I lead these discussions is say, what can we do today here? Now, I love regenerative design because permaculture is a small scale system. So you can, we can do rainwater harvesting it, or, small, there's these big dam projects, or, those are harder for a regular person to relate to what they can do. Has anyone?
Jenny, if you noticed in the chat, Amy Brunvan is responding and saying that's the report that she linked in the chat. It identifies individual action from Drawdown.
Okay, okay, perfect.
Yeah, she had put that in the chat earlier, and you two know how to get in touch with each other. You're both to SustainRT. Thank you, both of you.
Okay, and the chat, does the chat get archived if I want to go through these? This is my first time interacting.
Yes, because this whole thing is getting recorded, so you'd be able to come back to this very moment.
Yeah, and we can save
including the chat.
The chat. Yeah, the chat transcript can be saved separately and be posted as a separate document.
Okay, great. All right, that's a great lead on that. Thank you, because I'll be doing that March 18th. So having something to direct people to about what they can do.
Okay. And someone else is saying to refrain from consuming animal products. Right? How can you build a program around that? A film, a discussion, a book talk? Form a vegan support group in your library. If anybody else has something specific to share, feel free to come on the mic. Just let's be lean of speech. Give everybody a turn if they would like it. I'm making my way through Fred Stoss's email about Sierra Club.
So Madeline, it looks like Fred sort of reformatted the question, and I can read it to you.
Okay.
What are your plans for getting the message out to urban populations, and what are your plans for dealing with the urban and rural poor who have concerns about housing, health, food, nutrition, heating, and living that are so far above their concerns about climate change or sustainability?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Well, when you ask that, Fred, are you asking, I'm not sure who you're directing the question to. I guess it's all of us that work in, or those of us who work in urban libraries. I mean, it's all connected. So doing workshops around housing, health, food, nutrition, heating, you could do educational experiences around that and weave in how it's connected to climate. So you could start with people's more intents and basic needs, and then wrap it inside the story of climate change that we are in and needing to move through as a society. That's the best answer I've got right now. Others, please feel free to chime in. I'd love to hear what people have already done in their libraries or are thinking of doing. I'll type one in.
Hey, this is Beth again. I'll just offer one little thing if you're thinking about little things. I know this isn't the big, capturing the big idea of this, but sometimes little things makes us feel better that we're doing something. And one thing we've been doing in our library for a while is we have like a party pack, we call it, with like 30 reused, recycled plastic plates and all this kind of stuff in a pack that people can reserve for any kind of event they're having, big or small. And we've been using it even for events with our students. And just the feedback we get from something that simple, that like, we're offering you food, but here's stuff, we'll take it and we'll wash it and reuse it again. The students actually have commented on how that's really a cool idea, and the other staff. So I don't know, if you're trying to think of something that makes you feel like you can do it and it's not a lot of work, sometimes some of the little things can help us get to the bigger things.
Beth, I think that sounds like a really interesting idea. That's something that we've talked about at our library, is how to decrease the amount of waste associated with events. And I'm just curious, who actually does the washing of the dishes? Do you have a committee that is assigned to that, or?
I do. No, whoever borrows it. Like we have a place, information on our wiki, internal wiki about it, and you can reserve it, and it's in a big container. But we do have a little kitchen in this library with a dishwasher and a sink, so we have that opportunity to clean it in-house. But whoever reserves it is in charge of making sure it gets run through the dishwasher and it's back to where it needs to be, so we all just kind of chip in. So it does take some work, but I'll say one of my most frustrating things is we did get like food catered, and we ask every time, don't bring us anything, we don't need utensils, we don't need anything, and they bring it every time. So I don't know how to get them to stop doing that.
Yeah. So people, thank you, Beth. People are talking about planting seeds. Well, CJ Wong from Merrimack says, as educators, we don't know how far these seeds are spreading, so just keep planting them. And then Nadine said, and plant literal seeds, like starting a seed library and doing a lot of gardening programs.
Yeah, I mean, the local food movement is it's key for, reducing, people's personal carbon footprint. So being able to grow your own food, or if you have that opportunity, getting seeds from a seed library, that can make a big difference.
This is Abra again. I'm not a librarian, so I'm kind of coming in a little bit as an outsider, but within academia partly. And I'm thinking about Joanna Macy's work here. I don't know if people are familiar with the 3 pillars of like resistance or holding actions, creating new structures, and then paradigm shifting. And she talks about how all 3 of them are necessary for what she calls the great turning away from the great unraveling, which climate change is a part of. And I'm just thinking about libraries as institutions of social thought and intellectual leadership, and like that you all are uniquely positioned to play a role around that 3rd circle of paradigm shifting of world views. And while, it's super powerful to do things like seed libraries and zero waste, those are really pragmatic things that people can wrap their minds around. I'm also wondering, like, could you play an additional role, or perhaps some of you are already, with like, how can libraries serve as hubs for new thought leadership development that moves at the paradigm level of the people that you serve. And then, from a watershed at that shift, what all can happen. So just wanted to put that idea out there and curious what others think.
Yeah, can I chime in on that? I think making sustainability a core value of librarianship has been huge. It just happened. And I think that the more we want to get libraries involved in this kind of programming, that we can leverage that if we have resistant, administrators or, how does this fit into libraries? Well, it's a core value of librarianship. And so empowering librarians to really stretch and get on the edges of what we do because of the ecological crisis. We have that now as a tool. That is a paradigm shift, the core value thing.
It is, and now we all have to take a role in implementing it and keep pointing back and say, well, we've got that resolution. That's the solution, is to give us leveraging and a justification for the work that we do in our libraries. And when somebody points a finger and says, that's not really part of your job, you're like, it's part of our profession.
Yeah.
So we gotta make this, work for us and as many ways that we can.
Yeah, I think it would be cool to create some kind of, maybe sustainability roundtable or something, a manual for how to get, sustainability programs through at your library, and maybe some, programs in a box ideas or things like that, so that someone who wants to participate as a librarian who may not be able to think up, that there can be templates or something, and it includes, how to make the case for budget, to get a budget for a program or things like that, or to buy however many copies of Drawdown and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jenny, you can feel free to
Yeah.
Spontaneous community of practice. This is where we're at. We can't wait for the next person to do it. When we have an idea, we have a little energy, put it out there. See if you can do an ad hoc, put together a Zoom call and start the manual. That's where I think we need to move. Just continually trying things and building on our skills and connections. I just want to do a time check. We have 5 more minutes left. So let's see if there's anybody else that wants to speak, and if Danny and Eric could help look at chat voices.
I see Amy has mentioned the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 17, partnerships. It's all about partnerships for achieving the goals. So that's important to keep in mind. And focusing on the SDGs in general, I know that IFLA has been talking about those quite a bit, the International Federation of Library Associations. But that could be another way to kind of frame conversation around.
Mm-hmm. And also I'll chime in, if you are doing something awesome, you can tell your story. You can write your story and have it put on the library map of the world. And your story would align with however many SDG goals, that's Sustainable Development Goals, that you see it fitting with. So you just can easily Google, or if somebody wants to find library map of the world. It's a very new project. There's only, I think, 6 stories up. And it's only a 350 to 500 word story with 1 image and some outcomes that you've already measured somewhat.
It looks like Beth has posted the link to that. Thanks, Beth. Danny mentioned repair cafes as another, outside the box kind of program where people bring in items and repair them, or learn to get the skills to repair them themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that also can connect to the Library of Things if you are lending unconventional items within your library, that's also
Well, I want to just point to the time. We've got just 3 minutes left. We can keep putting things in the chat, which you know will be archived. But before we all say goodbye, I want to also offer up these resources. When we had a conversation, a virtual conversation through SustainRT last spring, I think, it was not recorded. It was just a way to sort of share what's happening for us emotionally around it. And we, someone said, can you please make sure that there's support resources? So I wanted to offer that again this time around. And you can just take a peek and see what works. I've been a part of these Safe Circle calls for almost a year, and I highly recommend them. There's no commitment. You just get on the reminder list, and every other week you get a little Zoom link if you want to have a conversation live with people from around the country. I'm actually in the Good Grief Network 10-week online class right now. So there's lots of ways library people and others are giving each other space to have more deep conversations about this, because I've certainly noticed it's not possible, or maybe, given enough of like a time to have these kind of conversations in a casual and rushed way. So there are places where you can bring these concerns, questions, and find solidarity. And if anybody has other wants to add, please share them. You can turn on your mic or put them in the chat box. And I even see our new mentoring program could serve that role. If people feel like strongly about what's happening around them and all the systems that are really shifting so quickly, maybe you want to talk to your library mentor about it. Or your mentee, you could mentor around it.
I think one other resource that I just want to make sure that I plug one more time is the follow-up webinar that we have planned for next Monday. So I just posted the link to the registration form and more information to the chat, and it looks like there's a slide on that as well.
And there's the last slide, Eric, is a reminder with all the date and time. So I feel really good about the fact that SustainRT is offering that. So we're still going to get together, just this coming Monday, and we can continue connecting and being in solidarity, and we can use some of that time to continue some pieces of this conversation. Danny, do you want to say anything in closing about how you're going to lead that day?
Hi. So yeah, basically the purpose of that is, as we've all been talking about, part of what's happening in the world requires presence and is going to require our presence of mind and, require us to sort of step up and make changes. And we can't really do that if we don't notice what is happening for us and how we're connected to the world around us. And so my hope next week is just to lead some breathing exercises and an exercise that's particularly, it's actually one of Bob Doppelt's from a series that he did at Spirit Rock. And yeah, I'm hoping we can get ourselves into our bodies and then continue the conversation and talk about mindfulness in libraries, which is something that we didn't talk about here, which is fine. But if people are doing mindfulness events, that could be something that we talk about as well.
Yes. Thank you so much. And I think we're at time right now. I see people are already exiting. Danny, Eric, anything I'm missing before we sign off?
I don't think so. So we'll be sure to save the chat transcript and we'll post the recording when it's ready. So those will be posted to the Sustainability Roundtables events page.
Great.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming.
Yes, have a wonderful rest of your day.